The Adventure of the Copper Beeches is a short story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, published in 1892. It is a detective fiction and mystery tale, set in the late 19th century in Sherlock Holmes' famous residence of 221B, Baker Street, London, and the Copper Beeches, Mr. Rucastle's estate, 5 miles from Winchester, Hampshire. The short story is from the first-person perspective of Dr. Watson in a suspenseful tone. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Today, we will discuss the detailed summary, themes and symbolism of The Adventure of the Copper Beeches and cover the character analysis of Violet Hunter. The Adventure of the Copper Beeches begins at 221 Baker Street in London with Sherlock Holmes feeling a bit down because he hasn't had any interesting cases lately. He shares his mixed feelings with Watson, appreciating his friend's documentation of their adventures but also wishing for more challenging and scientifically detailed narratives. Instead of put color and life into each of your statements to embellish. A potential client, Miss Violet Hunter, seeks Holmes' counsel regarding a job offer as a governess that requires her to make significant personal changes. Geoffrey Rucastle offers her £100 a year to look after his 6-year-old boy and stipulates that she cut her hair short. Obey their whims of sitting here and there and wearing a particular shade of electric blue dress. When Miss Hunter rejects the offer, Mr. Rucastle writes her a letter to convince her. We are willing to give £30 a quarter, or £120 a year, so as to recompense you for any little inconvenience which our fads may cause you. Due to financial trouble, Miss Hunter is keen to accept the offer but wants Mr. Holmes' advice on it. Despite Holmes advising against it due to potential danger. I confess that it is not the situation which I should like to see a sister of mine apply for. Miss Hunter seems determined to accept the offer, thinking Mrs. Rucastle to be lunatic. Holmes, sensing trouble ahead, offers his assistance should she need it, indicating a sense of impending danger in the situation. But at any time, day or night, a telegram would bring me down to your help. 2 weeks later, a telegram arrives for Holmes from Miss Hunter. Please be at the Black Swan Hotel at Winchester at midday tomorrow, it said. Do come. I am at my wit's end. They meet Violet Hunter at the Black Swan Inn near Winchester, where she shares her unsettling experiences at the Copper Beeches, Mr. Rucastle's old country house in Hampshire. Mr. Rucastle can hardly be less than 45 and his second wife of 7 years, Mrs. Rucastle is a silent, pale-faced woman, much younger than her husband, not more than 30. Mr. Rucastle was a widower, and that his only child by the first wife was the daughter who has gone to Philadelphia. While the young Edward Rucastle, in Miss Hunter's care, was so utterly spoiled and so ill-natured a little creature. Their servants, Mr. Toller was a perpetual drunk and caretaker of the Mastiff guard dog, named Carlo. Mr. Rucastle informed her that Toller lets him loose every night and not to set your foot over the threshold at night. Mrs. Toller, his wife, is a very tall and strong woman with a sour face, as silent as Mrs. Rucastle, and much less amiable. Miss Hunter is instructed to wear a particular blue dress and sit in a particular chair facing away from a window, leading her to discover a man lurking outside through a concealed mirror. While sitting in this manner, she is asked to read or Mr. Rucastle tells hilarious stories with Mrs. Rucastle sitting stoically nearby. Once she is asked to wave away at the man outside. Further exploration reveals locks of hair resembling her own hidden in a locked trunk in a locked room with shutters barring the windows, supposedly used for photography by Mr. Rucastle. However, she suspects foul play, specifically upon finding an unknown occupant in the locked room. Mr. Rucastle threatened her, and if you ever put your foot over that threshold again, I'll throw you to the Mastiff. Seeking Holmes' assistance, they devise a plan to investigate the premises during the night. Taking advantage of the Rucastle's absence and Mr. Toller's inebriation while tasking Violet with securing Mrs. Toller in the cellar. Holmes deduces that Miss Hunter is hired to impersonate for Alice, Mr. Rucastle's imprisoned daughter in the room, to shun the man on the grounds likely being the daughter's fiancé. Mr. Rucastle wanted to banish the fiancé from the premises and thus let the vicious dog loose at night. When Holmes and Watson infiltrate the Copper Beeches that night, they find the locked room empty, leading Holmes to initially suspect some villainy by Mr. Rucastle by finding a long light ladder up through the skylight. However, upon Mr. Rucastle's return, mistaking Holmes for the liberator of his daughter, he releases his guard dog. The huge famished brute brutally attacks him. Watson shoots the dog and medically aids Mr. Rucastle, living but horribly mangled. Mrs. Toller then reveals the truth behind the daughter's confinement. Mr. Ruckcastle's greed drove him to imprison his daughter in hopes of coercing her inheritance left by her mother in the will. She had been locked away and made to cut off her fiancé, Mr. Fowler. Mrs. Toller helped in her escape by putting up a ladder by which Mr. Fowler rescued Miss Alice. Alice Ruckcastle's ordeal, including the forced haircut akin to Miss Hunter's, stemmed from her refusal to comply with her father's schemes. Subsequent events reveal Mr. Ruckcastle incapacitated and restricted to the Copper Beeches under the care of his devoted wife. Alice and Mr. Fowler marry and embark on a new life in Mauritius. The tale ends with Watson's note. As to Miss Violet Hunter, my friend Holmes, rather to my disappointment, manifested no further interest in her when once she had ceased to be the center of one of his problems. And she is now the head of a private school at Walsall, where I believe that she has met with considerable success. Let's analyze the adventure of the Copper Beeches. The titular copper beech trees are known for their robustness and longevity. They can live for centuries, with their deep, copper-colored leaves symbolizing endurance and resilience. The estate of Copper Beeches itself may represent strength and endurance, as it has stood for many years, witnessing not only Alice Ruckcastle's imprisonment but also the changing English norms. The dense foliage of the Copper Beeches can create a secluded and mysterious atmosphere. The presence of the trees may suggest that hidden truths are waiting to be uncovered, just as Sherlock Holmes eventually reveals the secrets of the Ruckcastle family. Trees, in general, are often associated with protection and sanctuary. Miss Hunter initially sees the job offer from Mr. Ruckcastle as a chance for refuge and security, a sanctuary away from destitution. However, she soon discovers that the perceived sanctuary of Copper Beeches is fraught with danger and deception. The changing colors of the leaves from green to copper in autumn symbolize the cycle of life, death, and renewal. Miss Hunter confronts the mysteries of Copper Beeches and ultimately emerges stronger and more self-assured. While Alice Ruckcastle was imprisoned, her freedom snatched and was so ill that her hair had to be cut, but, in the end, she escaped and lived a free life. Historically, Copper Beeches have been prized for their beauty and ornamental value, often found in grand estates' gardens and wealthy landowners' gardens. The Copper Beeches surrounding the Ruckcastle estate may symbolize the family's affluent status and their desire to maintain appearances despite the darker realities lurking beneath the surface, leading to the idea of deceptive appearances. On the surface, Copper Beeches appears to be an idyllic estate, but beneath its facade lies a sinister secret. Similarly, Mr. Ruckcastle presents himself as a benevolent employer, but he is revealed to be manipulative and cruel. Mr. Geoffrey Ruckcastle deceives Miss Violet Hunter by offering her a well-paying job as a governess under seemingly innocuous conditions. He seeks to control Miss Hunter's appearance and behavior to pass her off as his imprisoned daughter. Mrs. Ruckcastle is complicit in her husband's schemes, participating in the deception to manipulate Miss Hunter. Holmes himself often reminds Watson and others to look beyond surface appearances and consider the reality beneath, emphasizing the importance of observation, faculties of deduction, and of logical synthesis. The theme of control and fear is closely tied to deception and manipulation in the adventure of the Copper Beeches. Mr. Ruckcastle exerts control over his household, particularly his wife and son, using intimidation and coercion. His son subconsciously imitates his desire for cruelty by brutally mistreating animals. Mrs. Ruckcastle is a silent and submissive woman who has all the hallmark signs of being fearful and emotionally abused by her husband, who is also much older than her. Also, Alice's confinement results in her not complying with the unreasonable and greedy demands of her father. Mr. Ruckcastle also attempts to control Miss Hunter's actions and appearance by making her cut her hair and sit by the window in a specific dress, demonstrating his desire for dominance and authority within his own home. He dangles wealth in front of an unemployed and desperate Miss Hunter and writes her a pressing letter to coax her to accept the position of his child's governess. He shows the vicious guard dog to Violet upon her first arrival at the estate to instill a sense of absolute fear and authority over her. Threatens her life when Miss Hunter crosses her boundaries and sets foot near the locked room. Other than manipulation and power, in the adventure of the Copper Beeches, multiple characters vie to control the narrative. Sherlock Holmes begins the tale by expressing dissatisfaction with Watson's rendition of their myriad exploits, critiquing its narrative technique. He intended the adventures to have been a course of lectures of deduction and of logical synthesis in severe reasoning from cause to effect. But Watson turned those records into a series of tales by putting sensationalism and emotional color and life into each adventure. Meanwhile, Mr. Rucastle tries to construct a wholly contrived narrative, portraying Alice's false lack of interest in Mr. Fowler by coercing Violet Hunter into staging scenes. While traveling towards the countryside from London, Sherlock Holmes associates crime with these dear old homesteads, suggesting that crimes can happen even in places we think are safe and familiar. While some people see the beauty of these scattered houses like Watson, others, like Holmes, see them as isolated places where crimes could happen easily because they are far away from other people and there is a feeling of isolation. The countryside fills Holmes with a certain horror. Even though the countryside looks beautiful and peaceful, terrible things can happen there just like in the darkest parts of the city. The lowest and vilest alleys in London do not present a more dreadful record of sin than does the smiling and beautiful countryside. In towns, the community's pressure and public opinion can stop crimes and bring justice more effectively than the law alone. However, in isolated countryside houses, where people are unaware and less connected, terrible things might happen without anyone knowing, and justice might not reach there easily. But look at these lonely houses, each in its own fields, filled for the most part with poor ignorant folk who know little of the law. Think of the deeds of hellish cruelty, the hidden wickedness which may go on, year in, year out, in such places, and none the wiser. In The Adventures of the Copper Beeches, Edward Rucastle displays cruelty at age 6. This is hinted at early in the story by his father's description. Oh, if you could see him killing cockroaches with a slipper. Smack! 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 3 gone before you could wink. Violet Hunter describes him to be so utterly spoilt and so ill-natured a little creature. The child's life seems to be filled with 2 things, moments of extreme anger and times when he feels sad and moody. He enjoys hurting animals that are smaller and weaker than them. His whole life appears to be spent in an alternation between savage fits of passion and gloomy intervals of sulking. Giving pain to any creature weaker than himself seems to be his one idea of amusement, and he shows quite remarkable talent in planning the capture of mice, little birds, and insects. Sherlock Holmes explains how he can learn about a child's behavior by looking at their parents. He believes that this child is cruel because of their parents, and this cruelty could cause harm to the girl who is under their control. I have frequently gained my first real insight into the character of parents by studying their children. This child's disposition is abnormally cruel, merely for cruelty's sake, and whether he derives this from his smiling father, as I should suspect, or from his mother, it bodes evil for the poor girl who is in their power. A lot can be discerned about the Rucastles through observing their son's behavior. Edward displays unusual cruelty, whether learned or inherited, from his cruel and selfish parents. Despite initial hesitation, Miss Hunter's wise decision to seek Holmes's assistance and bravely confront the mystery of Copper Beeches demonstrates her independence and agency. Despite the dangers she faces, Miss Hunter refuses to be passive or complacent. She is perceptive, as she keenly observes the personalities of her employers and their servants. She discerns the traits of the troubled Edward Rucastle. She brilliantly maps out the structure of the Copper Beeches estate, noting the locked room and the shuttered windows. She is observant, smart, and courageous. Not only does she perceive the thinly veiled threat of Mr. Rucastle but also actively takes part in trying to rescue Alice Rucastle. By the end of the short story, Miss Hunter financially elevates herself from being almost poverty-stricken to being the head of a private school. Hope you like, share, and subscribe for more videos.